Welcome to Interface. Today we have with us Professor Suranjan Das, an eminent historian, academic and Vice Chancellor of Calcutta University, to share his views related to higher education in India. Sir, being an academician and Vice Chancellor of eminent university, we would like to know your views regarding the state of higher education in India.
Well, first for me it's a very welcome break and welcome opportunity to participate in this interface program. As I see it, there are four major challenges for higher education in India, and these are the four E's. What are they? First, the challenge of expansion. Second, the challenge of excellence. Third, the challenge of equity. And fourth, the challenge of employability. And all these four E's are related. Let me come first to the point of expansion. As you know, even compared to many of the developing countries, the gross enrollment ratio in India in higher education is much lower than many of the developing countries. The estimates vary, but roughly we can say we have barely crossed 21-22% in terms of the gross enrollment ratio at a time when the world average has already crossed 30%, 30-35%. So we need to expand the base of higher education in the country, and the Planning Commission has rightly estimated that unless the gross enrollment ratio reaches 30% by the end of the 12th plan period, India cannot be an active player in the creation of an international knowledge economy. Now, there have been various estimates of how much expansion we need to reach the target of 30% the gross enrollment ratio. Some say we need an additional intake of 64 lakhs at the undergraduate level, nearly half of that figure for the postgraduate level, but expansion is a must. The question is, do we only have expansion? No. There has to be also a simultaneous development in the quality of the teaching learning process, in the quality of education. And unless the quality is simultaneously improved, the place of India in the higher education map of the world cannot be preserved, sustained and strengthened. So we have to strike a fine balance between expansion and excellence. So that is the second challenge, how we expand and at the same time improve the quality of education in our country. The third is a challenge of equity. As we know that India is a developing country, it is on the brink of a transition to a new phase, but it's also true that there is a great divide between the rich and poor in the country. Some of the best millionaires of the world come from India, but again we have one of the highest infant mortality rate, we have one of the highest concentration of poverty level. So there's a growing divide between the rich and poor, although Indian economy is expanding. So at a time when we are speaking of expansion of higher education, at a time when we are speaking of excellence of higher education, we also need to ensure that the fruits of development of higher education actually filter down to the broader sections of the society. I always think that education cannot be an end for itself. Education has to be a means to an end. It is like a weapon which can be used to create a better world order. And to make education a weapon to create a better world order, we need to open the gates of education to broader sections of society. So, equity and access is again another important challenge for the higher education system in the country. We expand, we excel, but we also ensure that the fruits of excellence, fruits of expansion filter down to the broader sections of society. The fourth thing, as I mentioned, is the challenge of employability. As you know, the unemployment rate in India quite high, and there is a growing apprehension that first, many of the graduates in India, particularly in professional subjects, are not employable. There are reports that engineering graduates are not employable. There are reports that the management graduates are not employable. So employability is also a very important challenge for higher education. We need to create students, as community of students, who after they go out of the campus, they can hold their head high so that they can get jobs, they can either be self-employed or they can get jobs. So employability is very important. But at the same time, I do not buy the argument that higher education should essentially be geared to create only employable graduates. That is not the sole aim of higher education. Yes, we need to create students who can be employed, but we should also remember that the basic aim of higher education is to create good citizens. What Martha Nussbaum, the famous American philosopher, said, to create inclusive citizens. So just creating engineers, just producing graduates, just producing historians, political scientists, managers is not enough, but they should also be good citizens. So when I stress the importance of employability in the development of the higher education system, I should also point out that just creating employable graduates is not enough. It is necessary, but it is not the sole goal. The sole goal should be the creation of a balance between employability and creation of good citizens. So these are the four important challenges in higher education, the four E's that I have mentioned.
Sir, in the neoliberal context, as you say, the molding of good citizens is one of the purpose of education.
Yeah.
There is a discussion going on
Yeah.
regarding the decline in social sciences as well as in literature studies.
Yeah.
How do you comment?
Well, that's a very important challenge, a very important question. I, being personally a social scientist, I do feel that the social science does not get the deal that it deserves from the funders, from the policy flavors. Because I think that unless there is a link between science and society, unless the social demands can be met by technological advances and scientific developments, there cannot be real progress of science and technology. For example, we have made fundamental progress in the world of pharmaceuticals, in the production of drugs. But yet, so many thousands of people in the country suffer and die because of the lack of drugs. Also, the drugs are produced in India, or the drugs come from outside. So there is a mismatch between production and delivery system. You produce, but you also have to ensure that the products go to the right people and to meet the right demands, to meet the right necessities. Now, this link between the distribution system and production cannot be done unless there is a link between scientists and social scientists. I also give you another example. We have made fundamental progress in biotechnology. The other day I was reading an article in the famous social science journal, you are acquainted with it, the Economic and Political Weekly. And a survey showed that only 10% of the researchers in biotechnology go to the benefit of the poor farmers. The rest of the 90% go for the industries or the multinationals. That is not a good scenario. That is happening because there is no link between the social science and science. The social scientists should tell the scientists what are the discoveries, what are the inventions, what is the scientific knowledge that should be produced for the benefit of society, to meet the societal demands. And the scientists should also interact with the social scientists to ensure that the knowledge that is produced in laboratories and classrooms, that can be transmitted to the better needs of the society. So the link between science and society, unless that is established, no country can progress. And social science therefore has to be given a good deal. Unfortunately, at least in India, the social scientists are not given a good deal by the policy framers. For example, there are so many fellowships for the scientists. There are so many grants that the scientists get even after they retire from the university. The social scientists do not get that. So we need to develop social science. In fact, the developed countries in the West have already realized it. So you have in the West, but even in America, multinationals funding social science chairs, which demonstrate that in the West they have realized the importance of social science. They have realized the importance of humanities. They have realized the importance of literature. Unless a holistic development of knowledge, there cannot be a full-fledged development of knowledge society. Mere development of science and technology cannot be enough for the creation of a knowledge society.
So people like Dr. Rao, eminent scientist,
Right.
also says that even basic sciences are also neglected by the state.
Sure, that's true. But that's again, I think there is a trend of rectification in that. One of the, what I would say sometimes, and that is not true only for India, I mean many of the developing countries, they tend to imitate what is happening in the West. So in the West, there was at one time a huge emphasis on technology in applied sciences. So we also went in that line. But again, the West has realized it. So there is now a relook at the entire science and technology policy. In the West now, there is a new emphasis on basic sciences. In India also, after a period of neglect of basic sciences, the government of India has taken the right decision of re-emphasizing the importance of basic sciences. Therefore, now you have an infusion of a considerable sum of money, not enough, I mean, that Professor Rao, C.N.R. Rao and others would like, but there is, at least compared to social sciences, social science doesn't gets only a pittance. There is now greater emphasis in basic sciences. So, you have more fellowships in basic sciences, you have the creation of new institutes in basic sciences, ISARS and others are coming up, Institute of Social Science is getting a lot of funding, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research is doing very well in terms of basic sciences. So, yes, the error that was committed say a decade back, that is now being rectified, and I think now we are on the right track of striking a fine balance between basic sciences and applied sciences.
Sir, what about the new areas developing under interdisciplinary studies?
Yeah, that
especially even in social sciences, new areas are emerging.
Sure.
History, political science,
Sure.
and also foreign policy issues.
Sure. I mean, that is again an area which needs to be given due importance. In the developed countries of the West, and particularly in many universities which are, the benchmarks of progress in higher education, interdisciplinarity has become a buzzword. We have to go in for interdisciplinary process where the traditional boundaries between history, politics, economics, sociology break down. Because say any theme in political science that can be addressed from various angles. It can be addressed from a historical angle, it can be addressed from a contemporary angle, it can also be addressed in a futuristic angle. Say take the issue of ethnicity, which is very, very important, issue of identity politics, which is important both in India as well as any pluralist society. Now, this entire problematic of ethnicity, it has a historical past. I mean, particularly in colonial countries, ethnicity in many ways had been constructed a category, but then that constructed category in some sense became real, and they became a part of broader political processes. They became a part of contemporary political processes. So, contemporary element comes in, and then again you have to have a futuristic vision how ethnic politics either can become a part of mainstream politics, or ethnic politics has to retain autonomy of its own. Now, ethnicity therefore has a historical angle. Historians can look at it from the historical context. The political scientists can look at it from a contemporary context, and therefore sociologists and political scientists can join hands to see how ethnic politics in a country like India can develop in future. So, any issue in social science can have and must have an interdisciplinary element in teaching learning process, but there is a big but. I personally feel even when we emphasize interdisciplinarity, we should not ignore the rigors of the mother discipline. For example, a historian should not compromise with the basic methodological aspect of historical research when a historian is collaborating with a political scientist. Similarly, a political scientist should not compromise with the basic rigors in terms of methodology of a political scientist when a political scientist is collaborating with a historian. Only then interdisciplinarity can have a meaningful focus.
Sir, you are interested in area study programs.
Yeah.
And this is an emerging field
Sure.
in all over the world.
Sure.
How do you comment on the state of interdisciplinary studies and area study programs offered in Indian universities?
Area studies are very important area in terms of interdisciplinarity. Because within area studies program, you can bring in historians, geographers, political scientists, people interested in women's studies, people interested in cultural studies, people of course interested in international relations. Because under area studies program, you study a particular area in its totality. Now, the UGC with which I was associated, I was a member there, and I was also associated with the area studies program as a member of the steering committee of the UGC for some time. UGC has a very active area studies program, and this needs to be promoted in a much bigger way, because area studies program can contribute in two ways. One, of course, it can contribute development of human knowledge, but area studies program can also help the state in the development of policy, in the development of the policy of the state in the wider international realm. So, area studies can have a relevance in broader human knowledge. Area studies can also have a relevance in terms of the foreign policy imperatives, in terms of the foreign policy formulation, in terms of the interactions of the state in international relations. So, in these two ways, area studies is very, very important. And I do feel that the various departments, social science departments in the universities, with the help of the UGC, should develop area studies program. In Calcutta University, we are experimenting with a new knowledge experiment, and this is about foreign policy studies. We have set up an Institute of Foreign Policy Studies with the help of the Ministry of External Affairs. And what we are doing, we are offering a 2-year MPhil course in Foreign Policy Studies, and we are also conducting researches on various aspects of Indian foreign policy as well as various aspects of international relations having a direct bearing on Indian foreign policy. Similarly, if other universities also take up this challenge, I think we can create a body of researchers who can contribute not only to the development of our knowledge in international relations, but who can also provide important inputs to the Government of India for the development of a viable and forceful Indian foreign policy.
So you are viewing education from a broader perspective.
Of course, I always do view education from a broader perspective, because as I told you in the very initial stage of this interaction, that I do not see education as an end in itself.
But there are criticisms that the budgetary allocation to education is much less than what is needed.
Oh, sure. I mean, for example, long time back it was stipulated that 6% of the GDP should be earmarked for education. We are nowhere near that. But it is also true that there has been substantial increase in the allocation of the budget in education, both in higher education and primary education. New schemes have been developed. In the higher education, you have a new scheme called the RUSA, Rashtriya Uच्च Shiksha Abhiyan. And that I think is a very important initiative, and that initiative, if properly implemented, can lead to a broader development of higher education in the country. The reason I am saying this is because of the follows. In higher education in India, there has been a particular distortion. The distortion is the dichotomy between central universities and state universities.
Sir, let me, that the Constitution provides education under the concurrent.
Sure.
Is it a problem?
No, it's not a problem.
Implementing?
No, it's not a problem. In fact, when education was brought from the state list to the concurrent list, the idea was that if education is brought on a concurrent list, then there should be a balanced development of education. That was the whole idea. Unfortunately, this has not happened. There have been geographical distortions. Some parts of the country have developed more in terms of education than other parts. Even within a state, there are distortions. And the most important thing is that despite the fact that education has been brought on a concurrent list, there are growing dichotomies between the central university system and the state university system. State universities do not get the same sort of financial support as the central universities get. The service conditions of the teachers are different in the central and state universities. So, this is one major dichotomy within the university system in the country. Although if you search for the centers of excellence in the country in terms of higher education, the UGC has recognized 14 universities as centers for excellence. And out of these 14 universities, majority are the state universities. So, if you look at the input-output ratio, the amount of money that a university gets and the output that is produced, the state universities are doing very well. So, but they are not getting the sort of financial support that central universities are getting. So, there is this great dichotomy, but this dichotomy is sought to be addressed through the RUSA, because through the RUSA, the state universities are supposed to get additional financial benefit directly from the UGC through the state governments. So, this is a very important initiative which, if properly implemented, might address some of the basic dichotomies within the higher education system in the country, but I still feel that there should be a parity in terms of financial grants that the central government gives to the various universities, the central universities and state universities. The service conditions of the teachers in central and state universities should be similar. The students in the central university and state universities should be getting the same amount of benefit, and it is only then we can think of a higher education system which is holistic, which is equitable, which will expand, and along with expansion there will be excellence and the address of the broader questions of the equity and justice.
Sir, what about the peculiar social milieu which exists in India? For instance, the caste system.
Mhm.
Is it a hurdle to the empowerment of the ordinary citizens to get education and to get to reach higher echelons of society?
No, I do not agree with that, because one has to accept the diversity and pluralism of our country. One has to also accept the fact that a large number of social groups are backward because of certain historical reasons. And it is the duty of the state to ensure that all citizens of the country get equal benefit and equal access to law, equal access to opportunities. And therefore, the social groups which had been backward, which had been pushed to the brink of social and economic development because of historical reasons, they need to be given greater protection, they need to be given certain important advantages so that they can come up in terms of social standards, in terms of other benefits, they can become really a part of the broader mainstream. So I do not believe that giving protection to the backward social class is an essential impediment. But I also believe that people of the higher castes but are economically backward, they should also be given protection. They should also be given advantages so that they can also rise up. So protection, reservation is certainly necessary. After all, even in America, you have the positive discrimination policy. So there is no reason why in India also, given the fact that historically there are large number of social groups who have been discriminated against, who have been deliberately kept on the brink of marginality of social development, should not be given protection and additional benefits so that they can become a part of the broader mainstream.
So there are the number of colleges are given autonomy. And there is a criticism. The main criticism is that the colleges are given administrative autonomy, not academic autonomy.
No, that
how do you view?
That is not true. I think when a college is given an autonomous status, that college is given autonomy both in administration as well as in academic matters. And I am saying this from my own experience in West Bengal. Of course, there were certain reservations initially about the grant of autonomy. But I think time has come when we have to recognize excellence. Of course, not at the point of compromising with expansion or not at the point of compromising with equity and access. If certain institutions have excelled themselves, they should be given autonomy, and of course within the constitutional paradigm. UGC has set certain parameters, certain guidelines on the basis of which autonomy works. And that paradigm of autonomy does not only include administrative autonomy, it also includes academic autonomy, but under the guidance of the parent university. We have a large, up to 5 or 6 autonomous colleges, and they operate under the guidance of the University of Calcutta. We do not foresee any particular problem. Some of the colleges are doing exceedingly well because, I don't want to name colleges, but some of the colleges have introduced 5-year integrated courses, which in Calcutta University we couldn't do because the size is very high, size of student population is quite high. And those colleges which have been given autonomous college status, they are doing exceedingly well in introducing new innovations. But as I said, they operate under certain administrative norms, and those administrative norms are framed in such a way, and they are all laid down by the UGC regulations. They are also governed by the university regulations and state government regulations. They operate in such a way that they are in tune with the principles of equity and access. They are in tune with principles of other forms of justice. I do not foresee any difficulty in the grant of autonomous status and recognition of excellence, provided the work within the existing paradigms.
Sir, from your experience as an academician as well as an administrator and being a vice chancellor of a university, famous university, do you have any policy suggestions regarding higher education in India?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, the 4 E's that I mentioned, the major challenges, and there has to be a balance between expansion and excellence, between a balance between excellence and equity, and a balance between equity and employability. These are the 4 challenges, and we have to ensure that this balance is maintained. The second, I think the state funding is a must, particularly in a country like India, which is in a period of transition. And since education falls into what we call social capital, the support of the state is a must. I do not oppose the role of private capital in higher education, because if there is private-public partnership in health, in transport, in other sectors, there is no reason why there can be a private-public partnership in education. But, this is the big but, I make a distinction between private-public partnership and commercialization of higher education. We have to be very, very careful in making this distinction. I am very much against commercialization of education, but I am not against the private players playing a role in higher education with the help of the state, because frankly, particularly for the state governments, they do not have enough financial resources to fund the higher education in a way that it should be doing. So, we need to take the support of the private capital, but not at the dictates of private capital. So, I make a clear distinction between private-public partnership and commercialization of higher education. I do not accept commercialization of higher education, but I have no objections to private-public partnership operating within the constitutional mandate.
So, we are opening up to foreign universities also nowadays, another controversial issue.
Foreign universities.
Foreign universities.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a controversy. The foreign regulation bill, university regulatory bill has not yet been passed in the parliament. Here again, I would say that I am not opposed to foreign competition, because I have faith in the human resources of my colleagues. But if the foreign competition takes place, it has to take place on an equal footing, on an equal level. There should be even playing field where the foreign universities and the Indian universities can compete with each other. But there cannot be a situation where the foreign universities can have certain advantages which the Indian universities don't have. If the foreign universities can charge as much tuition fees as like, if the foreign universities can have a separate policy in terms of service conditions of the teachers, if the foreign universities can develop a curriculum without giving due regard to the constitutional mandate, I am opposed to it. But if the competition is on an equal plane, on an equal footing, I do not have any problem with foreign competition. The foreign universities, they can obviously come, but then I would say the Indian universities should have a right to have their own, our branches in the foreign universities. My question is, will the UK and the USA allow Calcutta University or Calicut University or JNU to open their branches there? So, there should be even playing field. And there are a lot of other problems and intricacies which need to be resolved before we open the gates, the floodgates of higher education in the country to foreign universities. But as I said, I am prepared to have competition on equal level, but I would also prefer a strong opening for foreign collaboration. There should be collaboration between Indian universities and foreign universities.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot.